Welcome to another edition of Derf Taff Peed, the greatest fucking podcast of all time.
I'm in the Cliff Bar right now.
I actually had swallowed it all, but my saliva is a little thicker than usual. My saliva's a little thick right now.
I got thick saliva, guys.
I do.
Welcome to First Class Speed.
I'm gonna keep eating it. Fuck you.
Like you were gonna stop if I didn't berate you for it, you piece of shit. Fuck you! Now it's your fault that I'm eating it.
Yeah, it is.
Man, you guys excited to tackle this episode, man? 'Cause I'll tell you what, there's some topics that are real downers, but this is a topic that just brings you up. You feel cheery after you hear about it. You know, it's like,
I love a good cheerful story, man.
yeah, unethical human experimentation. How bad could it really be? I mean, is it bad? I mean, sure, but is it that bad?
It's probably pretty bad.
It's probably pretty bad. It really is. Like, doing research for this episode was like, well, I see. Okay. Well, humans suck. I mean, that's pretty much the conclusion you come to at the end of it. It's just like, wow, we're really fucked up.
Luckily, I already came to that conclusion at the beginning.
We're a really fucked up species. Yeah, but if you were on the fence, if you had a doubt, I mean, look, I know you guys are cynics. You already came to that conclusion a long time ago, but if you're on the fence, this episode will probably push you over. You'll become a pessimist after
I'm
this.
just enjoying, like I did during the pre-post show, watching TJ eat that Cliff Bar, man. I don't know why, but I'm riveted by TJ's consumption of that Cliff Bar.
Maybe that's unethical human experimentation.
I think that is. I think you are the result of an unethical human experiment. Yeah.
I can see it.
Yeah. They found a Yeti. They crossbred him with a human woman, and you are the result, TJ.
Wow.
I think it's kind of insulting that you would insist that I have human heritage, but I'll let that slide for now. I'll let that slide for the moment.
Whatever.
How gracious of you to let that slide.
It is gracious of me. Thank you for pointing that out, Scotty.
You're a really gracious person, TJ.
Yeah.
I mean, look, you seldom meet someone like TJ that's just so kind,
so
and caring,
kind, so compassionate,
genuine,
open,
giving, courageous,
humble.
Oh, definitely humble.
To a fault,
The
almost.
humility that I possess is crazy.
It reeks of humility in here.
Right. I would say it even
Constantly.
makes me better than a lot of people, just how humble I am.
The humility is dank in the room when you walk
Never one to
in.
brag. Never a bragger, dude. TJ's
No.
accomplishments.
I don't need to brag because my greatness is just so self-evident. The moment I enter any room, people are just like, wow, we're in the presence of someone better than us.
It was hard to work with TJ at first because he's such an example of humility and humble, gregarious
virtue,
nature and virtuous nature. Yeah, that
Grace.
I thought that I would never attain it, but really I've used that as the driving force. I'll never attain that level.
Right, but you can know that
But
maybe,
I can aspire to it.
Right, it's something. It's
As
like
the disciples
having a
aspired-
Christ figure to aspire to the greatness of.
Exactly. Exactly.
It
I mean, look,
makes you a
I'm
better
the original
person.
Shadow, Paul, but now you're the secondary Shadow.
I'm the Ringo now. I'm
you're Ringo
I'm
Starr?
Ringo Starr. Yeah.
Cool. I never realized.
Yeah,
you were
Paul's
Ringo.
the Ringo.
Matt Jarbo told me that.
Yeah.
He told me I'm the Ringo.
Is that in between his moving boulders?
Yes.
Is that
What would
He
that
took
make-
a break. He took a boulder break. And
What
told
would
me
that
I was-
make him exactly?
I don't even know. I don't know. I was flabbergasted
one
by,
of the monkeys,
by that
maybe?
insult.
Is he? Yeah, he's like a roadie for the monkey.
I was like, wait, so I'm a beetle? Yeah, but you're the worst beetle. Uh-oh. So? I'm still a beetle, motherfucker.
Yeah, that's
That's a really bad insult.
It
It
really
a pretty
is.
bad
Yeah,
insult.
it's like
Well, I understand
You're
what
like
he's
the
going for.
least rich
Yeah.
billionaire.
Yeah.
Fuck
But like
you.
comparing me to a beetle is just a bad way to start. I get what he was trying to do, but it's a Matt Jarbo insult. What are you gonna do?
It was actually pretty good for him.
It was good for him. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't expect any comeback at all.
Yeah, you expect me to be like,
Well, you
no.
probably- if you have any clap at, you got to be careful. You might get flagged.
That is true. Well, I did tell him, please don't flag me, Dad. I don't want to be flagged. Okay, I'm fine. I'm just joking with you,
leave
buddy.
this alone. We're all good here.
Fair enough.
That was just. I know we covered it already, but man, that whole incident was like I've never seen anything quite like that in my life.
Yeah, that was pretty
You
weird.
can actually show where your flag screen there.
Oh,
I'm trying to figure this out.
oh shit! Connection fading.
Can you guys hear me?
I can't hear you.
Skype is not. Oh, we lost Matt.
We lost him. I'll have to
Matt,
get
can
him
you hear
again
me?
later.
Me lovelies.
Just unplug your internet at that point. Oops, internet's down.
Sorry,
gotta
guys.
go.
We all live in a yellow submarine.
Yeah, that's a great song, dude. That's Ringo wrote that, right?
Of course
He did, dude. Ringo's fucking...
Ringo knows what's what.
Dude, Ringo's
Ringo was the
underrated.
biggest druggie of the group. He was the party kid. May not have been the most talented, but who cares?
He was still a Beatle.
He brought something to the table.
Yeah.
He's part of the fucking Beatle legacy. Fuck
Terrible
you.
drummer, you know? They needed a terrible
What am I
drummer.
doing?
I don't know, me lovely. I don't know how to play the drums.
But I've got this mescaline.
He had that, though. I mean, mescaline's pretty cool.
You know? Hey, you
that's
need a little Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds every now and then to fucking perk the band up, and he was their guy.
Hey, there's a connection to this episode with there, right there, man.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Ah.
Oh, really?
Later on, you're going to see that.
Later on, huh? Little
Little bit
preview of things to come. I guess we could get into it because it looks like you got quite a lot
Yeah,
here.
dude. Well, I have to read this. This is mandatory.
Mandatory.
The patrons have demanded, and now they shall receive.
Yes.
Pessimist Productions proudly presents Unethical Human Experimentation.
Woo! The feel-good episode of the year.
And you motherfuckers picked this shit.
Why do they want this? Why do
I
they...
don't know.
This was the $10 people that selected this.
Wow.
So this is what our higher end, more upper class
This is what
sort
they
of
fucking
fans
wanted.
wanted.
Right,
dude.
the upper crusty ones.
I wish to see humans suffer.
Human suffering. Oh, joy.
Joyous, rapturous,
So,
yay.
why don't you pull one of those images up for me, buddy?
Images? Yes, here you go.
That guy looks pretty happy.
He looks high as a kite.
He's
And I'm
having
gonna
fun.
be
I'll have one of he's having, please.
You have one of those needles jammed in your arm?
I'll take it.
So,
What is in that needle, Scotty? Do you know?
I don't know, dude.
You don't even
It was
know?
a cool image, though.
You just thought it looked cool, huh?
Unethical human experimentation is human experimentation that violates the principles of medical ethics.
Whoops.
Whoops, oh man. Such practices have included denying patients the right to informed consent, using pseudoscientific frameworks such as race science, and torturing people under the guise of research. And we're going to get into some of these other things. You know, during World War II, obviously, it was a big time for unethical human experimentation.
The Nazis did it, and
So just
so did we, I
because
guess.
you're wondering, informed consent, which I mean, it kind of sounds obvious, but let's just say for the sake of it, informed consent is based on the moral and legal premise of patient autonomy. You have the right, you as the patient have the right to make decisions about your own health and medical conditions.
Whereas in like a lot of these experiments, it's just like
You had no rights.
you're a test subject basically. We're
Basically,
gonna do
yes.
stuff to you, and
if
we're
it
gonna
kills
see
you,
what it
hurts
does.
you, harms you, it doesn't matter. It's all for the the guise of research.
Right, and I'm sure the justification is well, we're gonna save a lot more lives getting this research
So I mean,
done.
obviously,
So-
probably all of us here are somewhat familiar with the Nazis and different experiments we've heard in pop culture. So I kind of honestly going into this, I was like, well, how much of this has really gone on throughout human history? And to be honest with you, with this episode, it was, I mean, we couldn't even dive into it or delve into many of these episodes, and I mean, a lot of them have actually occurred in the last 100, maybe 50.
Well,
years
right,
or
because
so.
I mean, we live in a way more scientific age at this point than previous generations
So-
of humans. So it makes sense that medical experimentation is at its worst in the most
Hey,
recent.
pass
100
me
years.
some of that Substance X, Scott.
Oh yeah, here's Substance X.
Thank
dude.
you.
Just so you might feel a little bit better.
Substance X
Yeah, thanks, guinea pig.
may cause paranoia.
So, are reminded that while humanity has in the past been capable of extraordinary feats of courage, ingenuity, and done so much to reduce the immense suffering, which without modern science would be even more commonplace, like all the diseases. Like, look, TJ,
Lies.
all the diseases you suffer from, dude, you've been cured thanks to modern medical science.
Nah.
Many of these experiments were not made to advance medical science, but to make us more efficient at waging war, the most destructive act possible, and the antithesis of what we view as the purview of medicine, which is to heal those who are sick and to alleviate
So
suffering.
basically, like evil doctors trying to figure out new ways to fuck human beings up.
Well, there's two sides to every coin. You know what I
Sure.
mean? If you're a
Right.
doctor, you understand the processes of the human body, and that gives you the ability to intercede in those processes for good or ill.
Sure.
Right.
Yes, that is true.
So there's no ignoring the power of science when it comes to figuring out how to kill people.
Right.
I mean, that's just what it does. That's part of it.
I know a lot of these experiments were like to figure out ways to we're gonna use this substance to demoralize the enemy, or I even heard ones about them trying to turn enemy soldiers gay and shit.
Oh, there's a lot of shit.
We've tried some wacky shit.
Look, the elephant in the room, and that's why I put them first. Yeah, go ahead and put that,
The Nazis.
the Nazis.
The Nazis.
I mean, we got to talk about them. Those are
Yeah,
the Nazis.
Nazis.
That's the next one.
This is
Everyone
the-
recognizes
these
this guy. This is our friend here, nice little guy.
Is that
Adolf
like
Hitler.
Paul's dad or something?
Gruben, Stacken, Flugen, Hagen, Diggen, Snugen, Dugendorf, Flugen, Sticken, Rocken, Doggen, Schnicken, Bloggen, Diggen, Ogen, Flix, Nacken, Leggedusk.
Believe it or not, Paul just.
I always
said
thought
he
it
wanted
was.
the bratwurst.
I always thought it was weird when you fucking hear these things like Hitler was a great orator and shit, and then every time you see a video of him, it's just like that. And you're like, man, that shit must sound way better in German, because in English he just seems like he's screaming.
Yeah. I mean, the German language in and of itself is just an angry sounding language.
I did a speech.
It sure
course,
is.
and we covered speeches of famous leaders, and Hitler didn't start his speeches off like that. He would first be talking to people.
Yeah, I know.
And then in the middle of his speech, he'd be doing shit like that, like, Einzelgruppen, Einzelsimon, you know, and he'd be like,
Yeah, you can't just open with that. People would just be like, whoa, too much. So he kind of like started slow, like, Hansengruppen,
Well, like,
Schnitzel.
kind of how we talked, like, remember when we covered,
And then,
how we covered,
Hansengruppen.
Hansengruppen,
Schnitzelblüten.
Hanslandersgruppen, Schneisen, Bratwurstfeiern.
Hansengruppen. Schnitzelblüten.
I'm thinking Einzelgruppen.
Oh, shit, man.
Well, it's kind of like how when we covered Pentecostals, like how they have a certain way they're going to make their money and they're going to do their act. It's very similar to that.
Du hast mich.
Oh, did you write that song, teacher?
No,
No, I wrote Mind Tile. dude.
Yeah. No, that was
sorry.
Stevie.
That was Steve.
Stevie wrote that. Come on.
So, Nazi human
Do
experimentation.
they know that story?
Do they?
I don't
think
know.
we covered it.
I think we might have at one point, but
If you want to tell it, go ahead.
do I have time for
No,
a
I
brief
don't-
aside?
I
I'm just
don't
going to
fucking
real
care.
brief. I'm going to tell them the very abridged version. So one
That's
time
fine.
my mom calls us. She's like, you guys, Stevie is actually a brilliant writer. And we're like, whoa, really? He wrote this poem and it's fucking brilliant. So we go and we read this poem and we're like, this sounds kind of familiar. So we put the lyrics of the poem onto the internet and we find out that it's just an English translation of Mind Tile
By Rammstein.
by Rammstein.
Steinball.
And the only thing he did was he changed the male pronouns to female pronouns. And that was it. And he just like, yes, I wrote this.
I am a brilliant poet.
Didn't he get
Really
mad when you
hard.
guys confronted him about
Yes.
it, too?
He's like, well, there's similarities, but
Similarities is the same.
You slapped your name on someone else's work, Steve.
What? Dude, we didn't just make this show about, like, ripping on Stevie and covering Stevie.
I know, Paul. It's hard not to. Stevie has a lot. There's a lot of Stevie stories.
Dude, Stevie is, like, he's a great, like... Jesus, TJ, you okay there, buddy?
I muted myself, so it's okay.
No, it's okay. And I'm just making sure.
No,
you're
I'm
all
good.
right.
You all right,
You
TJ?
doubled over.
It hit
TJ, you
pretty
okay?
hard.
You okay, TJ?
But I am
No,
all right.
Stevie's a fascinating
No,
subject.
Stevie he should be the subject of a roast.
No, I don't even want to roast him. I want to do, like, a full-blown, like, biographical DFF of Stevie.
Me too.
And cover all of the memes and all of the controversies and have him here to fucking back
That's
it
what
up.
I want. I want him here, and I
Yeah.
want him to argue for or against himself. And you know,
I don't think Stevie will really argue. Stevie has a weird thing about him. Like, he doesn't really necessarily disagree, but he doesn't really acknowledge it either. You know what I mean? He kind of just tries to, like, kind of ride the fence. I'm like, oh, yeah, that was kind of weird of me to do
Well,
that.
that's what I want to hear then.
anyway, back to these gentlemen on the
So,
screen.
Nazi human experimentation was a series of medical experiments on large numbers of prisoners, including children, by Nazi Germany and its concentration
I'm assuming
camps.
a lot of like the Jews and stuff were experimenting
Yep.
on, right?
In the early to mid 1940s, during World War II and the Holocaust. So the main targets obviously were Jews, but include the Romani, Sinti, ethnic Poles, Soviet
Right.
POWs, disabled Germans, and Jews all across Europe.
So pretty much anyone that was at their mercy, was experimented on.
Well, of course. I mean, like I don't think they were really concerned with ethics. They were all obviously
Right,
at
because
that
they're
point-
Nazis. So there's like, we're evil, so...
ethnic purity. You know, what I mean, like of
Right.
course.
So it's like, if you're a Nazi, you're just like, fuck it, I mean, that's kind of there's like certain advantages to that, right? Like just the fact that they have no ethics and they're just totally evil and they can just do whatever they want.
You would think, but then within that framework, there's also
Like,
disadvantages.
well, let me just ask you this. Was anything worthwhile actually discovered in that research?
I mean, by most standards that I read, not really.
So it was totally meaningless because it didn't even really accomplish anything
Well, they didn't follow
of value to
They
society.
didn't follow a lot of scientific procedures.
I mean, they did come up with like CX gas and shit, right? Because of it.
Actually, Zyklon B and stuff was actually invented.
Zyklon, yeah.
Zyklon B was actually invented before the Nazis,
Oh, okay.
and by
So-
someone who was actually Jewish as well.
So what you're telling me is, for all their human experimentation, all this stuff, you're telling me the rigors of like aside from being unethical, they didn't even follow the rigors of science. So they didn't even really get useful data from the
a lot of it was
experimentation.
pseudoscience. Yeah.
So I mean, it was kind of like was it like occultist shit? Because you hear that shit tied to the Nazis a lot.
I didn't really look at that angle of it.
Okay.
So I wouldn't be the best. I mean, I'm not saying. Look, I'm not going to say 100% nothing medical value.
But from
came
what
up.
you could tell from your cursory
Largely,
research,
no.
Because you went way beyond the Nazis. Because I think it's a lot more. I mean, it's one thing to say the Nazis did this shit, but I think what's going to actually be shocking to people, or at least to some people, is just how often, our country
The
engaged
not
in this shit.
Nazis.
Yeah, like because they're the bad guys, so it's like, well, they did bad stuff. People are like, oh, okay, yeah, makes sense. They're the Nazis. But when they hear about the U.S. government doing it, then it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe.
And we're going to kind of get into that. Actually, I'm going to read a statement, basically, the government about kind of how that experimentation even occurred after the Nuremberg trial. So,
Right, of course.
Nazi doctors conducted as many as 30 different types of experiments on concentration camp inmates. Mm-hmm. They performed these studies without the consent of the victims, one that we talked about, informed consent.
Right, of course.
Who suffered indescribable pain, mutilation, permanent disability, and in many cases, of course, death. At the Nuremberg doctors' trial, which brought 23 German doctors to trial immediately after the war, prosecutors found 15 defendants guilty of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and 7 were hung.
So now we're going to look at some of their experiments.
So this is high-altitude research. So can you pull up the guy, Sigmund Rascher?
He looks like a nice guy.
Definitely.
How do you manage to look evil while holding a baby?
And
That's why I pulled it.
the baby is reacting appropriately
Yeah.
too.
He's like, what the fuck?
That baby looks like it's in pants shitting terror, and this guy looks like he's about to fucking bite its head off or something.
This is Sigmund Rascher.
He looks great.
So he was
Looks like a
working
nice dude.
as an SS doctor in 1939 when he wrote to his boss, Himmler,
Himmler.
Hitler's right-hand man, if you're wondering, and requested human subjects for his experiments. Rascher was a member of the Luftwaffe, which is the German Air Force, and a medical doctor who was researching the effects of a plant extract on cancer. He thought human subjects would be far better than rodents, and Himmler agreed, even though they'd only met about a week before. And a study at the Dachau concentration camp began.
That's Dachau.
Oh, Dachau.
Dachau.
Thank you.
Das ist Dachau.
In 1942, Sigmund Rascher and others conducted high-altitude experiments on prisoners at Dachau, eager to find out the best way to save German pilots forced to eject at high altitude. They placed inmates into low-pressure chambers, then stimulated high altitudes as high as 68,000 feet, and monitored their physiological response as they succumbed and died. So basically, let's see how high people can go before they die.
Right.
So
How much pressure can the
Yeah.
body take before it dies?
And after that, he would dissect the victims' brains while they were still alive to show how high altitude sickness resulted from the formation of tiny air bubbles in the blood vessels of a certain part of the brain. Of 200 people subjected to these experiments, 80 died outright and the remainder were executed. So even if you made it through the experiments, you were still killed.
I like the part where they dissect your brain while you're alive. That's like some Hannibal Lecter shit.
Fortunately for them, your brain has no pain sensors, so...
Yeah, but
least
still,
there's that.
it's kind of like, someone's rooting around your that something that does something. You know what I'm saying?
This guy was also involved in these freezing experiments we're talking about later, but we're actually going to talk about his
What I want to
end,
know is
too.
why, because it says in the first paragraph that he got into it because he was looking into the effects of a plant extract on cancer, and then the next thing you know, he's conducting these weird high altitude experiments.
Yeah, they probably found another use for him.
He also worked on blood coagulants. He was working on a number of things. So he actually had some promise, but he actually had a very grisly end and was actually killed by the Nazi Party. So attempting to please Himmler through demonstrating that population growth could be accelerated by extending female childbearing age, Rascher publicized the fact that his wife, Caroline, had given birth to 3 children even after reaching 48 years of age, and Himmler used the photograph of Rascher's family as propaganda material. However, during her 4th pregnancy, quote-unquote, Miss Rascher was arrested while attempting to kidnap a baby. So he basically pulled a fast one on Himmler, which is...
He had a scam going.
That's a no-no. Of course, Himmler felt fucking betrayed, and Rascher was arrested. In addition to acting as an accessory to kidnappings of the first 3 infants, so this might even have been his kid, and probably wasn't, Rascher was also accused of financial irregularities and the murder of a former lab assistant, and scientific fraud. They were both condemned and, of course, fittingly put into concentration camps. He was actually imprisoned at Buchenwald following his arrest in 1944 until the camp's evacuation in April of 1945.
Damn, hoist by his own petard. Dude.
Yep.
So he actually did not even end up facing the tribunals, though.
So he and his other prisoners were actually taken to Dachau, which
Yep.
is where he did his research.
And
so.
the greatest irony, where he was executed by a firing squad.
So he got executed at the very same place where he used to have people
And
executed.
at the very end of the war, it was 3 days before Americans entered the camp. And
so he would have been, if he'd have lived
Oh, it
for
was
3
house
more
cleaning
days, he'd have
time,
been
then.
liberated. They're
Yeah,
like,
they didn't
nope,
want this guy.
This is a guy that we don't want saved. He's definitely going to die.
Knew too much.
Yeah, probably.
And
You
of
got to
course-
think about it. He was like, how much of that went on in the Nazi Party in the last days of the Reich? You know what I
Oh,
mean?
tons.
Before the Americans and Russians fucking sandwiched everything into Berlin.
Or even people just killing themselves.
There were tons of that. Tons of people that knew too much. People that they just fucking got swept under the rug and ended up victims of the same fucking horrible machine that they helped to build. Isn't it great?
Yeah, it is kind of
I
great.
It's a
mean,
good
look,
object lesson.
They knew they were going to face justice, and they just chose the best way out for them, which is probably a bullet at that point.
This is probably the most famous guy.
Yeah, Joseph Mengele. So, basically, he did twin research. The twin research was in part intended to prove the supremacy of hereditary over environment, and thus strengthen the Nazi premise of superiority of the Aryan race.
Right.
And this is actually a quote I pulled about him, which I thought was interesting. This is from a former Auschwitz doctor. He was capable of being so kind to the children, to have them become fond of him, to bring them sugar, to think of small details in their daily lives, and to do things we would genuinely admire. And then, next to that, the crematoria smoke, and these children tomorrow or in half an hour, he is going to send them there. Well, there's where the anomaly lay.
Doesn't really seem like much of an anomaly to me. Just another charming sociopath.
Basically, just like, oh, how are you doing? You know, like knowing details about them. And it's like, okay, now
Have a
time-
little candy.
It's easier to deal with kids when they're pliable and not screaming.
So, I mean, I'm
I'd
sure
rather
that's-
not have to drag them to the fucking ovens.
Tomorrow you go to the ovens.
Where we will break you the most magical of breads.
So he's most famous for the experiments on twins. So experiments on twin children in concentration camps were created to show the similarities and differences in the genetics of twins, as well as to see if the human body can be unnaturally manipulated.
What does that mean?
One of the things he did was try to change eye color a lot. So the central leader of the experiments, Joseph Mengele, featured here, who from 1943 to 1944 performed experiments on nearly 1,500 sets of imprisoned twins at Auschwitz. About 200 people survived these studies, and we're actually going to see from one a little bit later on. And she's spoken a lot about her experience with Joseph Mengele and her sister, obviously because it was twins. So the twins were arranged by age and sex and kept in barracks between experiments, which ranged from injection of different dyes into the eyes of twins to see whether it would change their color, or to sewing twins together in an attempt to create conjoined twins oftentimes.
What?
One twin would be forced into undergo an experiment while the other was kept as a control. If the experimentation reached the point of death, the second twin would be brought in to be killed at the same time. Doctors would then look at the effects of experimentation and compare both bodies.
Oh.
All right.
So it was like, hey, we're going to inject you with this because you're the same, right? So let's see what happens to Paul and Paul's twin. And you might be the control, so you might just wait. And then, you think, okay, I'm not going to experiment on today. But then your brother dies, and then you just get killed.
Sounds pretty ethical.
Sounds pretty nice. So if you want to play that video now, TJ, this is someone that actually directly had experience with Joseph Mengele.
Cool.
I was injected with something that made me very ill. That was sometime in June. After one of the visits to the lab, I became extremely ill. There were two kinds of labs, and that's another very long story in itself. One lab I call the blood lab because basically what they did, they would tie both hands with the rubber hose, and then from this arm they would take a lot of blood. On occasion, 5-6 vials to see how much blood a person can lose and still live. And this arm, they would give shots. 4, 5, 6. I usually could count 5 needles going into my arm. My way of coping with it was to turn my head away and just wait for it to end. After one of these visits to the lab, I became very ill, and the rumor was that anybody who was taken to the hospital never came back. I desperately, next visit to the lab, I tried very hard to hide the fact that I was ill. But instead of tying my arms, they took me to a side room and measured my fever. And I knew I was in trouble. I was taken to the hospital, put into a barrack that I have not met many other people who have been in it. I call it the barrack of the living dead.
Maybe skip a little bit ahead.
I'm walking on sunshine.
I mean, this
Whoa.
is wow, uplifting.
Don't it feel good?
But it's just crazy to have someone that actually had experience with these kind of experiments and just survived it. 'Cause like I said, most of these people ended up being killed.
Right.
Her experience kind of
You
going
said what? 200 survived out of
1,500.
1,500 sets.
So 3,000 people.
About 200 people survived
200
out of
people.
1,500 sets. So out of 3,000 people, 200 survived.
She got violently. It's gonna skip ahead. She got violently ill for a couple weeks, and like basically Joseph Mengele was like, "Well, she's gonna die. It's such a shame." But she actually ends up surviving for 2 weeks. She said the only clear memory she has of this time in this hospital barracks is basically crawling to a water faucet to try to drink water and just passing out constantly while she was doing it.
Was living dead, because they couldn't walk. All they could do is scream. Twice a week, the trucks would come, and they would throw them like sacks of potatoes onto the truck, and the screams were horrifying. So this was a place where they collected people until they had a place in the gas chamber. After 2 weeks, my fever broke.
Yep.
I realized that if I could show them that my fever was going to go down, that somehow they were going to release me. So I learned to read the thermometer. The two girls who were with me taught me how, and I don't know what disease they had. The nurse came and put in the thermometer. I would pull it out, check it. If it was too high, I would shake it down, put it back in, and let it stick out in the back. And this way, I was in charge of how much fever I was going to have. I was very concerned because I thought, well, I could right now be well and be reunited with Miriam. But I was worried that they would become suspicious. So I worked it very carefully. It took me 3 weeks for my fever to be normal, even when I was released. And in 3 weeks, I proved to Mengele that I was well. Mengele, in my case, never, ever talked to me. He talked about me. He talked at me. You have to realize Mengele did not treat us as human beings. We were just his treasured experiment subjects. It's a very strange relationship because in the barrack itself, when I was with the other twins, he was very handsome, and there were some girls who were 12 and 13 years old, and they would say, oh, he's like a movie star, and they would have a crush on him. In addition to that, all these children have lost their whole families. So he became the father image. He became our father and our tormentor, our protector and tormentor at the same time. I would say that in all these bad things, there was still one pretty lucky thing, that this monster of a doctor was interested in experiments on twins. If he wouldn't have been interested in experiments, I wouldn't be here to tell you my story. So in all that crazy, crazy, miserable place, I have to look at it as still some strange stroke of luck.
I mean, isn't that just crazy in itself?
Dude, I would consider it a stroke of luck if a crazy mad doctor picked me up to experiment all kinds of like drugs and shit on me, dude. Crazy fucking psychoactive shit and like document my trips.
Oh, don't worry, we'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah.
But just it's crazy to hear from an actual survivor of these things, and like she even says at the end, it's pure luck. I mean, if she hadn't been selected and hadn't been a twin, and
Well, it sounds like a lot of the twins didn't fare too well either.
And you know what's
so.
crazy is every time her sister Miriam, because later obviously they lived in Israel, or her sister did, she got pregnant, she would get these massive kidney infections. And they actually found out when they actually looked at her kidneys, her sister's kidneys never developed beyond the age of 10.
Because of some result of the
Of
experiments.
these experiments, more than likely. I mean, I don't think there's any other cause beyond that, but there's some fucked up shit. And this is probably the most famous Nazi doctor. When I was doing my research, he popped up just consistently.
Yeah. So they were just kind of using people as lab rats, basically.
It's wonderful. So next one we're going to talk about is bone, muscle, and nerve transplantation experiments. So from
This fucking picture, man.
these are actually some of the Jewish kids that were experimented by Joseph Mengele
Oh, great.
from the concentration camp. Yeah, there you go.
Man.
I know it's. Oh, dude, this was a tough episode in a lot of ways because I mean, like, it's so terrible. I mean, like, this doesn't even get into some of the stuff like the phosphorus burns. And I looked at them and I was like, "There's no way we can show this on the show." I mean, it's abysmal to see what other humans have done to other people.
Why do they want us to cover this? Why are people paying us $10 to depress
I
them?
don't know, man. I'll be honest, it was fucking tough to look at some of that shit. Still is. From September 1942 to December 1943.
Is this the right accompanying picture for this?
This is Ravensbrück concentration camp.
Ravensbrück.
So the German armed forces basically wanted to study bone, muscle, and nerve regeneration, bone transplantation from one person to another. Sections of bones, muscles, and nerves were removed from the subject without use of anesthesia. As a result of these operations, many victims suffered intense agony, mutilation, and permanent disability.
Sounds great.
And of course, death.
Awesome. Cool.
So it's like trying to transplant whole parts of people.
Yeah,
into
can
other
I?
people.
Yeah, can I cut your arm off? Put
Probably
this arm?
fucked up both sides of the equation.
Yeah, not too good for anybody.
So you pull up the next image. This is actually the deposition of. This is a Polish name, so Jadwiga Kaminska. Yeah, I'm probably butchering that because I don't speak Polish. Gave a deposition about her time at Ravensbrück concentration camp and describes how she was operated on twice. Both operations involved one of her legs, although she never describes having any knowledge as to what exactly the procedure was. So, I mean, of course not. She's a guinea pig. They
They
give a
don't
fuck.
feel any need to explain to
No.
the test subject.
It was just, we're doing this to you now. Imagine having your arm cut off and no explanation given to you.
All right, you're coming in here. We're chopping into your arm. We're going to remove some bones. We're going to see
Yeah.
if these other bones take.
Yeah.
Like, all right. It doesn't sound that
She
good.
explains that both times, this is her actual deposition.
Would you even really want that explained to you? I guess.
I don't know.
Maybe.
I don't know if it makes it any better.
I don't
There's
think it-
actually an interview with her from the Scholl Institute or wherever one that's where the video of Ava was from.
Mm-hmm.
But the interview is in Polish, and the only way you can access it is if you go to their site, I think, which is in Toronto.
Right.
So obviously, I don't speak Polish, and I have no access to the site. So they actually have interviewed her, but this is the best I could find. So the procedure, she explains that both times she was in extreme pain and developed a fever post-surgery. Yet she was given little to no care. Kaminska described having been told that she'd been operated on simply because she was a young girl and a Polish patriot. So basically said, you're a part of the resistance movement against the Nazis, so we're going to operate on you.
Yeah, we're just going to carve your legs up.
She describes how her legs oozed pus for months after the operations. Prisoners were also experimented on by having their bone marrow injected with bacteria to study the effectiveness of new drugs being developed for use in battlefields. Many prisoners left the camps with disfigurement that would last the rest of their lives.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's great. So, yep.
Even more awesome to know that nothing of any fucking medical import came out of any of this.
No, I mean, it was just hoping that they could do transplant. I'm sure it was for German soldiers that if they lost an arm or something, they could take one off of a Jewish person or someone else. And,
I mean, it just sounds like that the Nazi movement in general was like a huge outlet for a bunch of repressed German sadists
Yeah.
yeah.
to oh yes, now it's part of the status quo to carve on people. Great.
Let's see what happens if we chop your arm off and try to sew it to another person. It didn't work. Maybe next time.
What if we cut off your head and sew it on the horse's body? You know, like, there's got to be, like, at some point you've got to know that, like, sewing two people together to try and create conjoined twins.
You're reading too much Mary Shelley there.
Yeah.
Man. Oh, God.
So you know what, guys? That's pretty bad. But how about malaria experiments?
Yeah.
This is actually the freezing experiment, so we're going to get to that next.
Okay, well, I'll just put it
That's
up for
fine, you
both,
can leave it up
because
there.
they're pretty close together.
From February 1942 to about April 1945, experiments were conducted at the
Dachau.
Yeah, that one throws me for a loop.
Dachau. Das
Concentration
ist
camp
Dachau.
in order to investigate immunization for treatments of malaria.
I'm
which
sure this is not going to be horrible.
They had they obviously had the African front. I'm sure a lot of people there were experiencing malaria. Healthy inmates were infected by mosquitoes or by injections of extracts of the mucus glands of female mosquitoes. After contracting the disease, the subjects were treated with various drugs to test their relative efficiency. Over 1,200 people were used in these experiments, and more than half died as a result.
So these are the kind of things that we will do still to this day with other animals.
Yes.
Like they'll take rats and monkeys and shit and inject them with all kinds of horrible diseases, the
way they ended up developing the cure for Hep C was they had to take chimpanzees, infect them with Hep C, and then study their brains.
Right.
Yep.
So right, but they're just not using rats in this instance. They're cutting out the middleman and going like, if this is gonna work on humans, then let's use humans.
Right to humans.
Yeah, they just skipped the line because now obviously do human trials for most drugs,
But
it takes a long
They
time.
didn't, I guess, come up with a cure for malaria, so
No, they did
Oops.
not.
didn't really add up to much.
Of course, many of the test subjects were left with permanent disabilities. Thanks, Nazis.
Maybe if the Nazis had just had a little more time, they could
I
have figured something out.
Doubt it.
I don't know.
I don't think so. I think Paul was on the head with saying they're a bunch of sadistic fucks. So freezing experiments. That's our old friend Sigmund Rascher again.
Good old Sigmund Rascher.
Right guy that was murdered by the SS for being a lying piece of shit. I guess too big of a piece of shit even for the SS.
Yeah, it's pretty bad when even the Nazis are like, man, you're a jerk.
Even Himmler's like, you're an asshole.
Somebody killed this Jagoff.
He's too much of a prick to even be a Nazi.
Pass me my Jew skull goblet and go kill that Jagoff,
I know,
Rasha.
In 1941, the Luftwaffe.
Luftwaffe.
Yeah, it sounds like a waffle.
Luftwaffe.
I want the Luftwaffe. Conducted experiments with the intent of discovering means to prevent and treat hypothermia. There were 360 to 400 experiments and 280 to 300 victims, indicating some victims suffered more than one experiment.
Not victims, Scotty. Subjects.
Oh, subjects.
They're trying to push the scientific method along, dude.
Another study placed prisoners naked in the open air for several hours with temperatures as low as -6 Celsius, which is 21 degrees Fahrenheit, for Americans watching. Besides studying the physical effects of cold exposure, the experimenters also assessed different methods for rewarming the survivors. One assistant later testified that some victims were thrown into boiling water for rewarming.
What?
Yeah,
okay, come on.
You're frozen. We're going to heat you up.
Yeah, just like a pork chop from the freezer. He's been outside the -6 for 20 minutes. Throw him in the boiling pot. Time to reheat him.
20 minutes. No,
no.
several hours.
No.
Oh, the human leftovers cooked.
Oh God. Good old Nazis.
I mean, like, I don't even understand that one.
because there's no way that it's just like it really just kind of nakedly testifies to the sadism because no one genuinely believes
Yeah,
Well,
that
there's no way.
that throwing someone who's been 21 degree weather.
I'll explain why they did it.
Okay.
But this is the next. Beginning in 1942, in the Dachau camp, prisoners were forced to sit in tanks of freezing water, pictured here, for 3 hours. After the subjects were frozen, they underwent different methods for rewarming. Many subjects died in the process.
I can't believe that.
Shocking.
It's crazy.
So the purpose of these experiments were conducted by the Nazi High Command to simulate conditions that armies suffered on the Eastern Front as German forces were ill-prepared for cold weather they encountered. Many experiments were conducted on captured Russian troops. The Nazis wondered whether their genetics gave them superior resistance to cold. So, like, obviously, the kind of way of thinking they had was the Aryan superiority. They're like, well, are Russians just naturally immune to the cold?
Right, because it's a big part of their beliefs.
Their culture and heritage and stuff, yeah.
Well, no, but I'm saying, like, it's a big part of Nazi beliefs that everything is super tied to genetics. So maybe the Russians are genetically better at handling cold than we are. And they want to investigate.
Yeah, nothing ever resulted from any of this. It was just, as we said, just very brutal and
Throw some carrots and potatoes in with this fun. Even if he cooks like the last one, at least we'll have something we can eat with the roast pig later. Oh, good idea.
And this guy here is obviously, he's dressed in basically the uniform of a German pilot. So they're kind of testing it in their clothing hey, can we figure out if they're able to better survive? Of course, nothing of medical benefit was ever derived from any of this.
Next week, we're going to test roasting them on an open flame to reheat them.
So, we heard some pretty bad stuff. So how about taking away the chance of a future? So sterilization and fertility experiments. So you pull up the next image.
Is that it?
Yeah. So you guys don't read German, which...
The Reichsschlegelfeckerblatt.
This is the law for the prevention of genetically defective progeny. Was passed on July 14th, 1933, which legalized the involuntary sterilization of persons with diseases claimed to be hereditary. So hereditary again comes up. So weak-mindedness, TJ, sorry.
Damn.
You're fucked. Schizophrenia, alcohol abuse, insanity, blindness, deafness, and physical deformities.
I'm fucked on about half of those.
The law was to encourage the growth of the Aryan race through sterilization of persons who fell under the quota of being genetically defective.
Dude, maybe that's why I'm sterile. Maybe the Nazis are still out there doing their work.
Well, Paul, we knew you were ineffective, Paul.
Yeah, you're stupid.
Hereditary is bad, Paul.
You're insane.
Yeah, they just melted your balls at birth.
What the fuck,
So
man?
1% of citizens between the ages of 17 and 24 had been sterilized within 2 years of the law passing.
So they went right to work finding people that fit this.
So obviously, since they're doing this to a lot of people, they have to figure out the different methods of doing it, of course. So these experiments were conducted by means of X-ray, surgery, and various drugs.
So they were even trying to find out, like, what's the most thorough way to, like,
And quickest.
sterilize
Basically,
people.
they're Germans. They want to be efficient. They want to efficiently
That's
sterilize
right.
as many people.
Removing the nuts should be like building a Volkswagen.
So one
It's
survivor
a simple process.
who underwent experimentation at Auschwitz said the experimentation she endured caused fainting from severe pain for a year and a half. Years later, she went to a doctor and discovered that her uterus had become one comparable to that of a 4-year-old.
Okay.
So they were apparently coming up with ways of making people's organs stay young.
Yeah, man, if we could just figure out how to do that to the whole body.
Make them turtles.
You know?
No organ degradation with aging.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
because right there we got a uterus that was like
Yeah,
locked
earlier
in
we had
time.
some kidneys that
Yeah, we
were
had
locked
some
in
kidneys
time.
that were locked in time.
Seems like the Nazis were on the trail of the fountain of youth, dude.
Hey,
They
dude.
had to be stopped.
Dun 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 dun.
So
dun,
intravenous
dun, dun.
injections of solutions speculated to contain iodine and silver nitrate were successful, but had unwanted side effects such as vaginal bleeding, severe abdominal pain, and cervical cancer.
Oops.
Therefore, radiation treatment became the favorite choice of sterilization. Specific amounts of exposure to radiation destroyed a person's...
Unfortunately, they discovered that 1 in 100 actually made the sperm super powerful.
That's how we got the X-Men.
That's how you got Magneto, dude.
Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
So it basically destroyed a person's ability to produce an ova or a sperm.
Right. So let me get this straight. So they passed this law that said everyone's got to be sterilized, and then they did all these experimentations on, because obviously they didn't want to experiment on the people that they were sterilizing who were still citizens. So they just did it on like the people in the concentration camps, their weird sterilization programs to try to figure out like how are we going to sterilize all these people.
Yeah, I mean, some people were just sterilized, and that was it.
I mean,
But
it looks like
honestly-
they used it as an impetus to round up other undesirables
Yes.
in their,
Oh yeah,
like people that were crazy.
because they took all the
then-
Nazis. I mean, like they took all the like the mental retards and shit, right? Yeah. So
They were all part of
was
it.
were
just
they
the-
all were were like retards sterilized, or were they just like thrown in the concentration camps?
Often, I mean, a lot of times they were just killed. Sometimes they were sterilized. Just kind of depended.
Kind of depends, like case to case basis.
Probably the timeline of when things happened too.
Okay.
But I mean, like a lot of these things were just like the idea, of course, because they were so obsessed with hereditary. Was like, look, if we eliminate all of these bad people from the gene pool, which is going to be the strongest, purest, most powerful race, we're basically going to have like a super powerful empire.
Right.
So the next one we're going to get into. A little closer to home, dude.
So you're going to talk about all the experiments they did on the poor POWs from America who were captured, right?
Oh, I wish we were.
Because this couldn't, like, you're not insinuating that America's done stuff like that.
I mean,
Come on.
man, the Nazis were fucked up. But after all that, I mean, look, guys, they're fucking Nazis. They're Nazis, the heavyweight champions of evil.
yeah.
If you just started discussing evil people or historical events, and
Like
everybody-
Hitler's going to be like one of the first things
Yeah.
out of someone's mouth. you
yeah,
know?
someone's
like,
gonna talk about Hitler the Third.
if you just
Reich,
go to someone on the streets, like name someone evil, they'll probably be like Hitler.
Adolf Hitler,
Hitler. He's the bad guy,
T.J. Kirk.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's
obviously.
definitely
Second,
fitting.
close second.
Definitely fitting. So, although a great deal of human experimentation has been performed to elucidate information otherwise not obtainable, there are many recorded instances of unethical human experimentation. There's also a history of crimes that were committed and disguised as human experiments, best exemplified by the activities Nazi Germany from 1933 to 1945, as we already talked about. As a direct result of these activities, a war crimes trial after World War II resulted in the creation of the Nuremberg Code to guide future human experimentation. Despite this, unethical experiments were conducted at major academic institutions in the United States in the years after World War II by otherwise normal physicians who did not feel that the Nuremberg Code applied to them personally.
Right. Because they ain't Nazis.
And a big part of the reason for these was personal advancement. They just felt like,
Right.
look, I'm not a Nazi. I'm doing this for this actually scientific benefit. They just did that to experiment and torture people.
Right.
So it's okay when we do it.
So the next one, I'm sure you guys have heard of this one. Our friend Alex Jones.
MK Ultra.
MK Ultra.
Whoa. Dude, you're reprogramming our fucking audience, and that's not cool.
Bunch of Manchurian candidates.
Program the audience. Okay.
So what is MK Ultra? Do you guys know what MK Ultra is?
That is a series of psychological like experiments done by the FBI and CIA to see if they can control the human mind.
That's mainly what it is. So Project MK Ultra is the code name of CIA-sponsored research operation that experimented in human behavioral engineering. From 1953, and this is important, the Nazis did this for about 10 years, to 1973, the program employed various methodologies to manipulate the mental state of Americans and Canadian citizens. Well, I'm fine with the Canadian part, but America, that's too far.
I mean, it's not hard. Like, there's not much there to manipulate.
I know. I mean, poutine. Here's a fucking plate of poutine.
Here, oh, look, a moose.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It is a moose. Give me a Molson. Let's watch this moose.
Let's eat some beaver tails, yeah?
Yeah.
These unwitting human test subjects replied with LSD, which I'm cool with, and other mind-altering drugs, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and various forms of torture. So LSD I was kind of okay with. The other things got a little extreme.
Sexual abuse.
Yeah, that's a little extreme there.
They were trying to sexually abuse people into complying with government directives or whatever.
Research occurred at universities, hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies.
Awesome.
Sweet.
The
Yeah.
project sought to develop chemical materials capable of employment in clandestine operations.
So they were trying to come up with like a gas or a poison that they could give people that would make them pliable.
Yeah. So the CIA, their aim was we can use this on the Soviet bloc.
Right.
You know, we'll basically use mind control on them and make them do what we want, or our soldiers as well. Like we'll make our soldiers killing machines.
Right.
No fear, you know. 'Cause, I mean, imagine that this fucking Soviets or the Chinese or whatever go up against soldiers that don't care. They're just like die, die, die. No fear. March in there, kill everyone.
Sweet.
Just obey orders at all costs. And of course, obviously, we often think of the Manchurian candidate, you know, the guy that's brainwashed to kill, you know, the Soviet premier or the president of the United States, whatever.
I would like to say that if the government is still interested in LSD in this area, you can come kidnap me and I will be a willing test subject for this.
And you know what? I mean, a lot of people said this about Trump, dude. I mean, so the CIA want to use similar methods on their own captives and were interested in manipulating foreign leaders with such techniques,
See?
devising several schemes to drug Fidel Castro. Ooh.
Damn, they were going to try an MK Ultra Fidel?
Yeah, Fidel was going to come out and be like, America!
I love you.
From now on, all of us Cubans work for America!
They tried to give Fidel this copy, what had the MK Ultra drug inside of it. But Fidel, he knew right away.
Too smart.
Right away, Fidel had one of his assistants take it, and, then Fidel had another slave. You know?
And
It worked.
It worked. Though.
It worked on my slave,
I mean,
though.
Fidel lived to be our still alive.
Lived.
Sorry, slip of the tongue there.
Yeah,
Still lives to
You
this
know,
day.
you know that rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated.
Of course, the U.S. government does like to lie about you.
Oh, yes, they do. You can go to Cuba. You can't go to Cuba. It's okay to go to Cuba again. Everybody celebrates. No, you can no longer go to Cuba again. It's crazy. I say
It is
everybody
crazy.
come. Everybody come to Cuba.
I'd like to go there.
I'll go.
I like to see Cuban culture, dude. Cubans have great food, great taste.
I'll give you a big cigar
Thank you.
and a fat Cuban ass to suck your dick.
All right, well, wonderful. Look forward to my
Thank you,
visit.
Fidel.
No problem.
Cuba,
It's the least I can do.
Cuba.
especially after our government went after you like that. That was just really unfair.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's a game, It's a game. I forgive.
So, surprise, surprise. Many of the people that were experimented on never gave any sort of consent. A common method was actually they hired prostitutes to take their johns, and of course, then they would give them a drink. It'd be spiked with LSD, and then they would observe them. And the guy actually that was observing them would actually
Jerk off in the closet.
he probably did that too, but he actually had a toilet built so he could take a piss or take a shit while still observing the experiment. He didn't have to go to the bathroom.
Wow. Yeah, that's thoughtful.
And one thing that you guys have probably seen was they've seen the housewives on LSD, like, oh, I'm losing sense of perspective and
Yeah.
reality, my ego death and all that. That was part of the MK.
You know
Ultra
what, dude? The
program.
experiment itself might be unethical, but them building a fucking custom shitter for the guy doing the experiment, no, that's ethical as fuck.
That is.
They were ethical as fuck when it came to the experimenters.
Yeah, that's
and their
super
comfort.
Well,
You
I mean,
know?
look, you gotta take a shit. You gotta take a shit.
Exactly. A lot of these dudes, even in other operations, man, they just got a duty in their pants or poop in a jug or something and keep it in there with them. This dude had a toilet.
Yeah, dude.
He did,
Behind his mirrored glass or whatever he was observing
So can
from.
you pull up the next image,
Had a
TJ?
nice toilet. No, I want to keep searing this into people's brains.
Come on, TJ. They've been seared enough. This is Richard Helms. So most
Handsome
MK Ultra
guy.
records were destroyed in 1973 by order of CIA Director Richard Helms.
I can't believe he would do that.
I can't believe he did that. So it has been difficult for investigators to gain a complete understanding of more than 150 funded research projects sponsored by MK Ultra and related CIA programs. And by the way, at the time, the program was funded to about $10 million, which for inflation is about roughly $86 million now.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the dudes that would get the time bat.
I actually found a picture of him and Richard Nixon, which I thought was funny, but I was like, whatever. So MK Ultra is exposed. So next image, please, TJ.
Okay.
In December 1974, the New York Times alleged, I'm sorry, not really alleged, but yeah, maybe at the time, that the CIA had conducted illegal domestic activities, including experiments on U.S. citizens during the 1960s. The report prompted investigations by U.S. Congress in the form of the Church Committee and by a commission known as the Rockefeller Commission that looked into illegal domestic activities of the CIA, the FBI, and intelligence-related agencies of the military. It's like the NSA, or whatever the precursor of the NSA was. So the New York Times revealed this story. The suicide reveal was a guy that basically killed himself because of the experimentations done to him.
Damn.
So the next image, TJ.
I wish the CIA was still involved in like infiltrating groups and destroy. Well, maybe they are. Do you think they're still infiltrating groups and like giving drugs to people?
I don't
'Cause
think
that's
so.
the opposite type.
I don't
of
know,
shit.
but it's weird that
Because if you want to talk about the effects of MK Ultra, which people like Alex Jones said, this is what basically the beginnings of the trying to brainwash people and mind control people, was actually what's commonly thought of is that it actually, because of the dispersal of LSD, because if we want to go do a little backtracking, the CIA actually sent two guys to Basel, Switzerland, to buy the world supply, the entire supply, which is about 10 kilograms of LSD, so to use with MK Ultra. They brought that back to the U.S., and that's actually how LSD became dispersed amongst the U.S. population.
Damn. Thanks, CIA.
Which is actually theorized to have started the U.S. Counterculture movement, the 1960s, the hippie movement, the free love, the
that
expand
was
your
once
mind.
again. I'll have to remind you that was actually Howard
Oh, okay.
Bloom
Well, Howard Bloom in tandem with the CIA.
that started the '60s.
So it kind of backfired.
Why
they
is
believe.
Norm Macdonald there?
I don't know. He's a time traveler.
Norm Macdonald is that? Does
That
the guy
is
on the left
him.
look like fucking Norm Macdonald? Anybody else? 'Cause-
that is him.
Yeah, it looks like
it's
fucking
Norm.
Norm Macdonald to me.
This is actually the Church Committee, which we actually talked about a second ago. So, in the summer of 1975, Congressional Church Committee reports that the Presidential Rockefeller Commission report revealed to the public for the first time that the CIA and the Department of Defense had conducted experiments on both unwitting and cognizant human subjects as part of an extensive program to find out how much influence and control human behavior can be through the use of psychoactive drugs such as LSD and mescaline, and other chemical, biological, and psychological means. Whitey Bulger, the the fucking guy that the movie Black
Yeah, I remember
September.
White.
Yeah.
He was actually a willing participant in prison. To get out of prison early, he did a bunch of testing with LSD. I think he was given it
dude.
like 60 to 100 times.
Man,
What a cool prison sentence.
I know, seriously.
That's how he got out of prison early.
Well, you can serve the rest of this 10 years, Whitey, or you can come with us for a couple of weeks and spend it high on mescaline and LSD.
So I highlight some of the parts here.
um,
So much.
Let's see if we could control him through having hot bitches suck his dick all day. I think it's working, guys. I'm feeling way more patriotic.
And another guy, actually, Frank Olson, had died after the administration of LSD. So I guess
Right.
LSD can kill you.
Whatever.
Much
He's
of
a
what the
pussy.
Church Committee and Rockefeller Commission learned about MK Ultra was contained in a report prepared by the Inspector General's office in 1963 that had survived the destruction of records ordered in 1973.
Huh.
So basically, it just happened to be a record that wasn't destroyed that actually blew this wide open because they actually were lying to us, lying to Congress, lying to everybody about what they were doing. However, it contained little detail. Sidney Gottlieb, who had retired from the CIA 2 years previously, was interviewed by the committee, but claimed to have very little recollection of the activities of MK Ultra.
Very little.
I just
MK
don't
Ultra,
remember.
the $86 million program, which 150 studies were funded by us. No, I have no idea. Even as the leader of the organization.
I mean, it rings a little bit of a bell, but honestly, I couldn't tell you one specific thing they ever did.
Right.
This is a quote
It's
from
all slipped my mind.
Senator Frank Church, who was the head of this committee. Prior consent was obviously not obtained from any of these subjects. The committee noted that the experiments were sponsored by these researchers called into question the decision by the agencies not to fix guidelines for experiments. So there was really no guidelines. It was kind of just like, let's observe what happens when people get fucked
Hey
with.
guys, want to use
Get
taxpayer
drugs.
money to do some fucked up shit? Let's see if we can brainwash people, you know?
Are any of these dudes Nazi scientists that were brought over?
Probably all of them were.
Damn. Just like all the Nazis are still here, man. At least the American Nazis are handing out LSD and mescaline, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah, America did improve the Nazis
I
slightly.
mean, you got to admit that's a little better than cutting somebody's thigh muscle off and trying to transplant it or whatever.
So, President Gerald Ford in 1976 issued the first executive order on intelligence activities, which, among other things, prohibited experimentation with the drugs on human subjects except with informed consent in writing and witnessed by a disinterested party of each human subject.
So it took this for us to have a law that says you can't clandestinely feed a bunch of people drugs.
Well, basically,
and
the
watch them.
force of law. I mean, this is basically a executive order, so it's not necessarily
A law.
a law. It's just that basically that's the and of course President Carter and Reagan expanded the directive to apply to any human experimentation.
Right.
Another great episode of American history. Why don't you pull that one, TJ? Tuskegee experiment.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, a lot of people have heard of this.
the infamous syphilis study.
No, we'll basically read about it, but basically the long and the short of it is these men were allowed to have basically they all had syphilis, and they were allowed to have the disease progress with actually no little real medical treatment. But of course, they were promised that as part of the study to get free medical care.
Right, which causes horrible brain degeneration and
Other physiological effects, they're just terrible.
Yeah.
So these are actually some of the people who were participants of the study.
So basically,
what do they all have in common here? Is it all? Oh, they're all wearing hats.
They're all wearing hats.
That's what it is.
All wearing.
They're all in hats.
All wearing pants. Oh,
Yeah.
no, that guy's wearing overalls. Huh?
Yeah, there's an overall guy there, so he's an anomaly.
I don't know.
I
feel
think
like
it's the
there's some-
hats. It's got to just be the hats.
Some commonality
There
that
was
we're
some
missing.
common denominator that brought this group together.
Well, they all had
The dude on the
syphilis,
right
so-
looks like he's just got back from a safari.
Oh, maybe
Yeah,
they were all
which
on
is pretty
safari,
cool.
dude.
The Tuskegee experiment began at a time when there was no known treatment for syphilis. After being recruited by the promise of free medical care, 600 men originally were enrolled in the project. The participants were primarily sharecroppers, and many had never before visited a doctor. Doctors from the U.S. Public Health Service, PHS, which was running the study, informed the participants, 399 men with latent syphilis and a control group of 201 others who were free of the disease. They were being treated for bad blood, a term commonly used in the area at the time
Yeah,
to refer
so
to
these
a
doctors
variety
knew
of
they had
ailments.
syphilis and just said, "Oh, you have bad blood," which is basically just like kind of you have a cold.
The men were monitored by health workers, but only given placebos such as aspirin and mineral supplements, despite the fact that penicillin became the recommended
So
treatment
they
for
could have
syphilis in
treated their syphilis at
1947.
any time after 1947.
PHS researchers convinced local physicians in Macon County not to treat the participants, and research was done at the Tuskegee Institute, now called Tuskegee University. The school was founded in 1881 with Booker T. Washington as its first
I mean,
teacher.
isn't that the definition of irony right
Yeah.
there?
In order to track the disease's full progression, researchers provided no effective care as the men died, went blind, or insane, or experienced other severe health problems due to their untreated syphilis. In the mid-1960s, a PHS venereal disease investigator in San Francisco named Peter Buxton found out about the Tuskegee study and expressed his concerns to his superiors that it was unethical. In response, PHS officials formed a committee to review the study, but ultimately opted to continue it, with the
course.
goal of tracking the participants until all had died. Autopsies were performed, and the project data could be
Basically,
analyzed.
let's let a disease run rampant, even though we have a means of treating it.
Someone's like, hey, I think letting people knowingly die of syphilis just so we can see what the progression of the disease looks like is unethical. And the people in charge are like,
You know what? It kind of is, but we've already gone so far. It'd be a shame to stop, pull the plug now. We may as well just let this experiment finish. We won't do it again, no.
And obviously, Peter
it's the last
Buxton
time I'm going to do it.
was not really satisfied with that.
So as a result, Buxton leaked the story to a reporter friend who passed it on to a fellow reporter, Gene Heller of the Associated Press. Heller broke the story in July of 1972, prompting public outrage and forcing the study to shut down. By that time, 28 participants had perished from syphilis, 100 more had passed away from related complications, at least 40 spouses had been diagnosed with it, and the disease had been passed to 19 children at birth.
None of these people needed to suffer that fate, and it was just for basically just curiosity. Like, let's see what happens. Let's see this disease run its course. If you scroll down a bit further, I think it describes that they received reparations for being part of the experiment.
In 1973, Congress held hearings on the Tuskegee experiments, and the following year, the study participants, along with the heirs of those who died, received $10 million out-of-court settlements. Additionally, new guidelines were issued. New guidelines, huh? Were issued to protect human subjects in U.S. government-funded research projects.
Notice no mention of any of the people that ordered or participated in this serving a single fucking day in jail.
As they should have. And of course, talking about the Nuremberg Code here, which was totally just ignored,
Yeah, of course it was.
just for the purpose of investigating what syphilis does to the human body.
As a result of the Tuskegee experiment, many African Americans developed a lingering, deep mistrust of public health
I wonder
officials.
why.
I mean, what an unreasonable reaction, huh? In part to foster racial healing, President Clinton issued a 1997 apology.
The United States government did something that was wrong, deeply, profoundly, morally wrong. It's not only in remembering that shameful past so we can make amends and repair our nation, but it's remembering that past so we can build a better present and a better future.
Wow, I feel better already.
I feel your pain. I feel it. I always did feel it.
During his apology, the president announced plans for the establishment of Tuskegee University's National Center for Bioethics in Research and Healthcare.
Listen, I know we ruined 2 generations of your family. I'm sorry. All right?
sorry about
I'm
that.
sorry about that. I wanted to say our bad.
I like how your Bill Clinton is very, very close to your pimp mom.
I like that too.
I feel your pain, TJ. I feel it deep down.
I want to hear Bill Clinton go. What is? I want to hear him go smoke a cigarette, dude.
All right. Do you want to hear Bill Clinton meeting Pimp Monk?
Yeah, I do.
All right, here you go. Well, hey there, Pimp Monk. You looking good? Oh, thanks there, Mr. Clinton. I appreciate that. You want a cigarette? Why, yes, I do, Mr. Pimp Monk. I'd love to smoke a cigarette with you.
I love it, dude.
I smoke Chesterfields. Is that okay? Chesterfield's my brand.
Hey, you know
so
what,
beautiful.
guys?
That's so fucking beautiful.
Just in case you thought the freaking, look, Nazis, Germans, they're obviously terrible.
What
America.
about them fucking Asians?
What
though,
about Japan?
What
the world-
about?
Okay, so like the
Japan?
Japanese people, clearly they take out all this sadism that we have in their weird cartoons. That's why their cartoons are all so fucked up and violent and rapey and weird, right?
No, unfortunately not. So This goes inside Unit 731.
Unit 731.
So everyone in the world at that time was kind of getting into this. They were kind of getting into this.
Yeah, this was
whole
like a
human
big trend,
experimentation.
This
right?
was all the rage.
People were like, you know what? Let's fucking torture some people and call it science. Sounds good.
Basically, yeah. So if you let's go from here. Let's see. Scroll down a little bit, TJ. So this is basically the first experiment.
Ah, dude.
So this is Unit 701 experiments frostbite testing. So this, by the way, most of the people that are actually the subjects of these experiments were Chinese.
Right.
Japan at that time had invaded Manchuria or China, and basically just slaughtered people
And then
by
they're like,
the hundreds of thousands.
God, what are we gonna do with all these ones we got left? I don't know. Let's like do fucked up shit.
One of
to 'em.
your favorite actors, TJ, the Shimofune, was actually born in China.
Yeah, that's true.
So Yoshimuro, I butchered that, Hisato,
Yoshimura Hisato.
a physiologist assigned to Unit 731, took a special interest in hypothermia, just like the Nazis. As part of Maruta's study in limb injuries, Hisato routinely submerged prisoners' limbs in a tub of water filled with ice and had them held until the arm or leg had frozen solid and a coat of ice had formed over the skin. According to one eyewitness account, the limbs made a sound like a plank of wood when struck with a cane. Oh my god. Hisato then tried different methods of rapid rewarming of the frozen appendage. Sometimes he did this by dousing the limb with hot water, sometimes by holding it close to an open fire, and other times by
That
leaving the
joke I
subject...
made earlier about roasting people
Yeah.
to re-thaw them, somebody actually did it.
Yeah.
Other times by leaving the
Took
subject
the
untreated overnight
Japanese
to see how
to
long
do
it
it.
took their own person's own blood to thaw it out.
Oh yeah.
And you don't have to go to next. I just have each one pulled up.
That worked out pretty good, huh? Yeah. Vivisection of conscious prisoners. That sounds cool. Let's vivisect some people, huh? You ready to get vivisected, Paul?
Of course he is.
Vivisected alive, dude.
Can they
Why
give me
not?
a bunch of LSD first, and I'll
No.
If they give me enough, I'll vivisect myself.
Unit 731 started out as a research unit investigating the effects of disease and injury on the fighting ability of an armed force. One element of the unit, called Maruta, took this research a little further than the usual bounds of medical ethics by observing injuries and the course of disease on living patients. At first, these patients were volunteers from the ranks of the army, but as the experiments reached the limits of what could be non-invasively observed and the supply of volunteers dried up, the unit turned to the study of Chinese POWs and civilian prisoners.
I see.
Lovely, dude.
And as the concept of consent went out the window, so did the restraint of the researchers. It was around this time that Unit 731 began referring to confined research subject as logs, or Maruta in Japanese. Study methods in these experiments were barbaric. Vivisection, for example, is the practice of mutilating human bodies without anesthesia to study the operations of living systems. Thousands of men and women, mostly Chinese communist prisoners, as well as children and elderly farmers, were infected with diseases such as cholera and the plague.
The bubonic plague.
Then had their organs removed for examination before they died in order to study the effects of the disease without the decomposition that occurs after death.
So not only do you have to have the plague, but then you get your like stomach ripped out while you're still alive.
Right, so what you do is we inject you with the plague, give you a few weeks,
To have the plague.
then we strap you to a gurney, bring you in a room, cut you open, and rip your fucking guts out while you're still alive
Let's see what it's done to you.
to just kind of see what they look like, how they're doing.
Subjects had limbs amputated and reattached to the other side of their body.
Yeah,
Normal.
What was that about? I just want to see if we can do it. We can
Yeah,
see if we can swap the
to-
legs around.
To observe the progress of gangrene.
Okay.
Okay.
Finally, when a prisoner's body was all used up, they would typically be shot or killed by lethal injection, though someone may have been buried alive. So that's nice.
Wow.
didn't
They
get
don't
shot.
even give them the fucking mercy of a bullet at the end of it. Just roll them in a ditch.
Yeah, just throw them in there.
None of these Chinese, Mongolian, Korean, or Russian prisoners assigned to Unit 731 survived their confinement.
Yeah, even the Nazis left some survivors. Fuck. Weapons test, so you see a guy being bayoneted through the chest. That's
Great.
cool. The effectiveness of various weapons was of obvious interest to the Japanese army. To determine effectiveness, Unit 731 herded prisoners together on a firing range and blasted them from varying ranges by multiple Japanese weapons. such as the Nambu 8mm pistol. Yeah, let's make sure this pistol kills people. Boom. Okay, it does. Bolt-action rifles,
They wanted to
machine
know it
guns, and
worked.
grenades. Wound patterns and penetration depth were then compared on the bodies of the dead and dying inmates. Bayonets, swords, and knives were also studied in this way, though the prisoners were usually bound for these tests. Flamethrowers were also tested on both covered and exposed skin. In addition, gas chambers were set up at unit facilities and test subjects exposed to nerve gas and blister agents. Heavy object weapons were dropped onto bound prisoners to study crush injuries. Subjects were locked up and deprived of food and water to learn how long humans could survive without them. And victims were allowed to drink only seawater or were given injections of mismatched human or animal blood to study the transfusions and the clotting process. Meanwhile, prolonged X-ray exposure sterilized and killed thousands of research participants, as well as inflicting horrible burns when the emitting plates were miscalibrated or held too close to the subject's nipples, genitals, or faces. And to study the effects of high G-force on pilots and falling paratroopers, Unit 731 personnel loaded human beings into large centrifuges and spun them at higher and higher speeds until they lost consciousness and or died, which usually happened at around 10 to 15 Gs, though young children showed a lower tolerance for acceleration forces.
As would be expected.
I guess that the Japanese really, they went super
They're very
hardcore into
thorough.
torture. They're like, fuck you,
We
Nazis.
want to see everything that can happen to a person.
Yeah.
Every means of warfare, killing them, sterilizing them, torturing them, fucking cutting them open.
They're making the Nazis look like a bunch of rank fucking amateurs with this shit. They were just doing all kinds of
The
shit.
next one, TJ.
And we got more. Unit 731 ain't done yet. They also had their own syphilis experiments.
So this is, if you go back to that picture, this is General
Shiro Ishii.
commander of Unit 731. So he was a Japanese Army medical officer, microbiologist, and the director of Unit 731, a biological warfare unit of the Imperial Japanese Army, involved in forced and frequently lethal human experimentation during the Second Sino-Japanese War.
And are you even going to mention the beloved creator of the Super Mario Brothers franchise?
Yep.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Venereal disease has been the bane of organized militaries since the ancient Egypt, and so it stands to reason
I
the
wonder
Japanese
why.
military would take an interest in the symptoms and treatment of syphilis. To learn what they needed to know, doctors assigned to Unit 731 infected prisoners with the disease and withheld treatment to so basically the Tuskegee experiments but in Japan. Blah, blah, blah. Rape and forced pregnancy. Okay. Beyond just the syphilis experiments, rape became a common feature of Unit 731's experiments, in quotations at this point. For example, female prisoners of childbearing age were sometimes forcibly impregnated so that weapon and trauma experiments could be done on them.
So get them pregnant so that you can then shoot them and see what the gun does to
Yep.
a
Yep.
pregnant
I guess so.
person.
After being infected with various diseases, exposed to chemical weapons, or suffering crush injuries, bullet wounds, or shrapnel injuries, the pregnant subjects were opened up and the effects on the fetus were studied. The idea seems to have been to translate the team's findings into civilian medicine, but if Unit 731's researchers ever published these results, the papers seem to have not survived
so
the
you
war
gotta
years.
get just a bunch of sadists, basically. I mean, no, I heard that the one thing I did read was that some of these experiments and the information derived from them did actually have some use.
Okay. So at
Now,
least
whether people use them or not, it's a major question of scientific ethics. I mean, obviously at this point we've done. I mean, because look, no one else has really done these kind of experiments. And I think they're a little bit more thorough than even the Nazis. I think to some degree was just like you said, hereditary. It was about the Aryan race. It was. I mean, there's more of a sadism element to this, where it's like this. They're definitely sadistic here too, but there seemed to be more of a methodical scientific process going on with these experiments. And I think we'll go to the conclusion why later.
germ warfare.
So obviously, we'll talk about what happened after the war.
Right.
The totality of Unit 731's research was in support of their larger mission, which by 1939 was to develop horrific weapons of mass
Just find a way to
destruction
basically quickly kill the
for
Japanese
use against
population.
the Chinese population and presumably American and Soviet forces if the time ever came. To this end, Unit 731 cycled through tens of thousands of prisoners at several facilities across Manchuria, which had been occupied by imperial forces for years. Inmates of these facilities were infected with several.
So basically,
of the
if you want to
most lethal
summarize this,
pathogens known to
so you don't have to
science.
read all of
Yeah.
it, it's basically just like they wanted this super basically like a super germ or bug that could go in and just wipe everybody out. Like, and then like, oh, we have China now.
So they were trying to just like send something over there that would just kill all the Chinese.
Well, yeah, kill all the Chinese, and then anyone that's left, take all their women, basically have Japanese soldiers and Japanese citizens rape them, and just start a little new Japan. Like, 'cause, I mean, you have to remember, Japan is a tiny island, and China is a fucking huge country. It's a huge swath of land.
Less China, more Japan.
That's basically what it was, the Empire of Japan.
To this day, Japan has not apologized for, and China has not forgiven the countless atrocities Japanese forces visited upon China between 1931 and 1945.
Because you have to remember at the time, of course, these are mainly Chinese citizens.
Right. And obviously, if a bunch of foreigners come to your country and torture a bunch of people to death, you're probably not going to feel too keen.
Why don't you pull up the
towards
next
them.
image, TJ?
Sure.
This is
I think that's the same. Here we go.
So this actually features General Douglas MacArthur, and this is actually the surrender of Japan. He's basically signing the document, the Declaration of Surrender, whatever the fuck it's called. So what do you guys think happened to Unit 7031 and the people that participated in it?
I actually know, so I'm not gonna.
I don't know for sure, but I'm gonna guess that they were immediately brought to America and put to work.
They were granted immunity.
Hey.
Among the individuals in Japan after its 1945 surrender was Lieutenant Colonel Murray Sanders, who arrived in Yokohama September 1945. Sanders was a highly regarded microbiologist and a member of America's Military Center for Biological Weapons. Sanders' duty was to investigate Japanese biological warfare activity. At the time of his arrival in Japan, he had no knowledge of what Unit 731 was. To make a long story short, basically, he's sent there, he investigates, and they basically stonewall him, like, we don't know what you're talking about. And he's like, oh, okay, you know what? Why don't we bring the Soviets in on this? How about the Soviet Union? They're known for being nice, understanding people. Maybe they'll be a little more receptive. So they basically give the guy whatever he wants. And this is basically where you find out a lot about Unit 731. But of course, featured here, so that's what I'll start reading. General Douglas MacArthur, who was the supreme commander of the Allied forces in Japan, basically got wind of this, and he secretly granted immunity to the physicians of Unit 731, including their leader, in exchange for providing America, but not the other wartime allies, with their research on biological warfare and data from human experimentation.
I mean, that sounds fair.
So all these guys that did all this horrible shit we just described, like unlike the Nazis, he basically said, just give us everything and start working for us, and you're free to go.
So we basically just outsourced all that horrible, unethical shit. We were like, let them do it, then conquer their country and force them to give you all the results so we can go like, our hands are clean. We didn't do any of this shit. We just studied it.
Yeah, we're innocent.
So American occupation authorities monitored the activities of former unit members, including reading and censoring their mail. The U.S. believed that the research data was valuable and did not want other nations, particularly the Soviet Union, to acquire data on biological weapons.
So we made sure to get in there real quick.
We got to beat the commies. Got to beat the commies.
That research was just ours, you know?
Yeah. It was basically just to thumb our nose at the Soviet Union. We allowed the atrocities of Unit 731 to go unpunished.
We must know how much X-ray is needed to burn the nipples off of a man. Give us your fucking torture shit.
Less than you'd think, honestly. Less than you'd think.
If you're a mad scientist, but there's actually something to what you're doing, even as fucked up as it is, the U.S. government will go, you ain't so bad, just come work for us.
At this time tomorrow, by the way, we will be at the Big Chief. So.
Oh, shit.
Because I'm looking at my clock, it says it's 5:12.
Well, that'll be an upgrade from where I'm at now, wanting to just hit the nuke button. Like, what is redeemable about a species that literally does this to itself? What is redeemable?
Maybe you'll find the answers at the Big Chief when you taste that belly buster.
And isn't it crazy? A lot of this happened in the same time period too.
Yeah, it's all pretty localized to the 30s and 40s.
1930 to about 1970. It was like the peak of human experimentation.
I mean, what I want to know is, because
I wonder what's going on behind the scenes today.
That's what I'm saying. Is like this. They didn't stop this shit.
Yeah, they've just figured out different ways of going about it.
They got more secretive with it, but they didn't stop this shit. So, like, what's being done today to prisoners?
Am I on InfoWars right now?
I'm just telling you. All these extrajudicial prisoners that America's fucking hoarding together. What do you think we're doing with those people?
Yeah, who knows?
All these fucking foreign combatants
following
or whatever
international
the fuck.
law and conventions, Paul. That's
they're
exactly
already they were already accused of doing psychological experimentation on the people in Gitmo. right?
Dude, you'd be a fool if
That's what they were doing in Iraq as well,
Yeah.
that busted wide open with all their psychological breakdown techniques that they were doing, the waterboarding and the stripping them naked and letting dogs almost eat
What
them.
about rendition to CIA sites in other countries where there's no there's no monitoring, there's no law, no one knows what they're doing there. You don't think they're doing psychological experiments?
I'm
there
saying
now?
if anything, they've accelerated this shit. They've gotten better at it. You know, they've gotten better at hiding it from people.
Well,
There's no way they stopped this.
They realize, like, doing it in our country, it's like, oh, then we get in trouble. But if we do it literally any other place in the world, any other country in the world, it doesn't matter.
Well, you can
New
see
crop of
America
test
right there
subjects.
outsourcing at the end of this.
Yeah.
Going to the Japanese and going like, hey, you did a bunch of shit that would not fly in America, but we'll let you guys all fucking walk away from all the horrible things you did. You give us all your research.
Look what happened to the Nazis. Most of them were fucking
Oh yeah,
executed.
a lot of them were
or
brought
spent-
here and helped build the fucking nuclear bomb and shit.
I mean, it's just crazy. It's like if you have, I mean, that's really the truth. If you have something so valuable, you can be the biggest scumfuck ever. But it's like if you have some, Paul, if you had some breakthrough with quantum mechanics or quantum computing, you could basically be like, Paul is a child rapist. He's a fucking serial arsonist. He's developing a bomb, but we caught him in time. Okay, well, he has this valuable information. All right, well, he's free to be a research scientist for the U.S. military.
Right.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, like the Comics Code Authority, the thing that regulates, or at least used to regulate comic books, like whether it's okay to read and all this, it's approved by some sort of governing body. That was all based on Dr. Frederick Wortham's Seduction of the Innocent, which was an attack on the comic book industry, where he said that like Robin's thigh gap was going to turn boys gay and shit, and he was a Nazi that came to America after the war.
Oh, they're going to be so gay. Look at this thigh gap.
So then and America is just right on board, like, yeah,
Time
The
to step
Nazis
up the
right.
censorship.
Look at this juicy boy thighs. Oh, I'm turning gay myself.
so that's what happens, you know. And like, I mean, obviously some of these people were punished, but most of them, like, the vast majority of people responsible for all this unethical human experimentation were not punished.
No.
Some of the Nazis were, the Japanese ones weren't, the American ones weren't, and even not all the Nazis were. So
a lot of the Nazis that took part in this shit were pardoned
Dude.
or never found or
And let me tell you,
allowed to move to other countries.
this is the fucking tip of the iceberg as far as covering the U.S.
I'm sure.
I mean, the fucking very tip. There's like tons of other studies that we could talk about. I mean, so this is like, obviously, if ever needs to be a part two, or if you ever want there to be a part two, there's plenty of meat left on this.
I think I'm taking a sick day if there's part 2.
taking a sick day.
part 2.
I'm going to inject myself with Ebola and stay home that day and see what happens to me.
Probably preferable.
Paul's unethical human experimentation upon himself.
I'm going to eat an entire large pizza and a whole thing of boneless wings, and then I'm going to sit home that day and see what happens to the human body when that happens.
Damn.
I can already tell you.
Diarrhea.
I got all kinds of unethical experiments planned for myself, dude. I'm gonna take
fair
a sick
enough.
day one day, and I'm gonna see how many times a human man can jerk off in one 24-hour period,
Wow.
and just to see what happens.
Paul's going to advance
you know what I mean?
science. Thank
Yep.
you, Paul, for doing what
Thank
most
you,
men
Paul.
are afraid to do.
No problem.
And tomorrow we're going to do an unethical human experiment on ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
To see how much Big Chief fucking food we can possibly consume.
I
So,
think it's going to be a lot.
see you guys then, hopefully. All right.
See ya.
Have a good one. Peace.
Boom. Peace.